Hello, this is Writers at Work, a podcast for readers and writers about the joys, heartaches, challenges, and satisfaction of the creative writing process. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Joining me on this episode of Writers at Work is Tom Mead, whose latest novel, The House at Devil's Neck, confirms he is a new master of the locked room mystery. For the uninitiated, a locked room mystery is a tale in which the crime in question is committed in circumstances under which it appears impossible for the perpetrator to enter the scene, commit the crime, and then leave undetected. Or at least that's what Wiki tells me. Typically, there's a supernatural element, or the appearance of a supernatural element. The likes of John Dickson Carr, Agatha Christie, G.K. Chesterton, Arthur Conan Doyle, and Edgar Allan Poe wrote locked room mysteries in its golden age. More recently, Rachel Howzell Hall, Stieg Larsson, Adrian McKinty, and Ruth Ware, among others, have written well-received locked room tales. Perhaps it says more about me than the form itself, but frankly, I can never figure out how the crime is committed and by whom, and thus how to write a locked room mystery is beyond me. The House at Devil's Neck is Tom Mead's fourth novel featuring Joseph Spector, a retired magician and now an amateur investigator. The series is set in the late 1930s in and around London, and Tom fully exploits the atmosphere of the time and place. Nearby, and occasionally in opposition to Spector, is Inspector George Flint of Scotland Yard, a deliberate man, unlikely to be swayed by anything other than the facts. With a wink now and then, Tom taps into all the tropes and yet produces tales that drip with nostalgia, yet surprise and delight. It's my pleasure to say, Tom Mead, welcome to Writers at Work.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you for having me.
Tom, tell us a bit about your background. What were you up to prior to the publication of your debut, Death and the Conjurer, in 2022?
Yeah, sure. Well, previously I had worked in education. So I worked at the University of Derby in the city where I live. And then I had moved to a sixth form college for 16 to 18-year-olds. So I was working in the education world, but I was also writing throughout that time as a kind of sideline. So I'd started off with short fiction, mainly crime, because of course that's always been my area of interest. And I had just got into ghostwriting and copywriting. So I wrote bits and pieces for websites, magazines, and things like that, but also some romance novels and all kinds of wacky stuff. But really, I always kind of nurtured a desire to write crime fiction under my own name.
Did you feel like you were improving your chops as you were doing that kind of sideline writing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly ghostwriting, where you have a set word count, you have a set deadline, and you just meet that deadline and you hit send. To me, that was a very kind of necessary apprenticeship, if you like, because it teaches you about what can be the trickiest parts of writing, such as actually finishing a project. When you're working only for yourself, I always used to find that I would have so many half-finished projects, whether it was short stories or whether it was a handful of chapters, things like that. So actually getting the words on the page and getting a project complete that felt like a kind of next step for me.
You like deadlines?
Well, it depends. But in general, yes, because again, coming from an academic background and having worked as a student and worked on the other side of it in the world of university administration, you get used to deadlines and assignment submission dates, which are strict and intractable. And so I try and retain a sense of that when I'm writing my own stuff. It helps me, I think.
Yeah. Were you a kid who loved to read?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a house full of books, particularly crime. The shelves were crammed with Agatha Christie. She was my introduction. I usually say she was my introduction to kind of grown-up reading, if you like. We had shelves crammed with the Fontana paperbacks from the 60s and 70s, and some of those glorious, lurid painted covers were very impactful, I would say. Even before I read the books, they really got my kind of gothic and gruesome imagination going. And then when I started reading the books and appreciating Christie's very subtle art of clue placement and misdirection and all that kind of thing, I was completely sold.
Yeah. I wonder what would have happened if your parents had a bunch of books by Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm a big admirer of Dashiell Hammett. Raymond Chandler, I enjoy very much as a stylist, but I am always particularly drawn to the plot. And Chandler famously was deliberately slapdash about plot in places, but that doesn't take away the fact that he was a superb stylist.
In addition to Christie, who were some of your other early favorites?
Well, I was always drawn to the so-called golden age of murder mystery, particularly because of the puzzle element in those stories, the game, the challenge to the reader. I suppose an early author that I started reading at quite a young age was Arthur Conan Doyle, who predates the golden age, but whose Hound of the Baskervilles is a very effective combination of that kind of proto puzzle plotting and a sense of something gothic and eerie and uncanny afoot. So that was that was a very important book when I was growing up. But subsequently, I would go on to discover the likes of Christiana Brand, whom I always recommend to people, a great British mystery writer who sadly was not very prolific, but whose books are really superb, particularly Green for Danger and Death of Jezebel, both of which have been recently reissued, and they're well worth a read. And the one that I always talk about is John Dickson Carr, the so-called master of the locked room mystery. He's very much a kind of hero of mine. I try to treat him as a role model. I often try to approach plotting and writing in the same way that he does.
You know, Tom, you stimulated a thought in my mind when you described that period where you went from being a child reader to being capable of reading adult books. I just have such a warm and wonderful memory of that. You know, when I was a kid, I've told the story before. My mother knew the town librarian, and she made it possible for me to go into the adult book section of the library, even when I was, like 8 years old or something like that. Do you remember that feeling that when you
Most
suddenly,
definitely, yeah.
Talk about it, please.
Well, it's certainly a very profound moment. I have something similar. Before I kind of graduated to grown-up reading, the books that appealed to me were kids' books, but books which I can still appreciate even now. Like, for instance, the Three Investigators series featuring Alfred Hitchcock. Many of those were ghostwritten by a brilliant author named Robert Arthur, and I have a lot of affection for that series. But and also things like Goosebumps, of course, the R.L. Stine books. So these were the kinds of things before I if you like, graduated to the more demanding, slightly more sophisticated books. And where I live, there used to be a very small library and an old scout hut, kind of a converted scout hut. And so there was very little delineation between the sections. But the move from kids to grown-up literature was, well, like you say, it was very, it felt very profound and meaningful at the time.
Yeah. Was that around the time you decided you wanted to be a writer?
Yeah, I think so. I was also drawn to old movies, which they used to show. There used to be a lunchtime slot on BBC Two where you get an old black and white movie, and I watched a lot of those. And I think that that method of storytelling, that very well, heightened, almost kind of hyper real look of classic film noir horror movies, things like that. I think that also kind of seeped into my unconscious, and I think I can still see shades of that in my approach to storytelling. So, for instance, the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes movies, and things like that.
Yeah, I do remember when I was talking to a friend of mine in school about a movie I had seen on TV, very similar to what you described. And he said to me, that was a book. And a lot of them are books, he said to me. And it was a wonderful moment. It was,
That's right.
to go to the
That's right.
library and suddenly find all these books that I had seen as movies, and then to sort of discern the differences.
Yes. Well, The Green for Danger, which I mentioned, the Christiana Brand novel, I saw the movie before I read the book, but the movie is a very faithful adaptation, featuring Alistair Sim as her series detective, Inspector Cockerill. But it is it's a movie that holds up very well and is very gothic in its styling. There's a great sequence where the characters are sneaking around an operating theater. It's set in a hospital, and they're sneaking around the operating theater after dark, and the killer appears dressed in surgical scrubs with the surgical mask, and it's very it's a very haunting moment, and that's the kind of thing, like those lurid Agatha Christie covers, things like that, they stick in your memory and they really stimulate the imagination.
Now, did you try your hand at other types of mysteries before you wrote Death and the Conjurer?
Yes. Well, usually what I write stems from what I'm reading. So there's usually, in some ways, a dialogue with whatever I've been reading. So obviously, my love of the Golden Age shows up in the Spectre stories because, of course, they're very much set within that world, but they also use a lot of the familiar tropes and motifs of the genre and try to have a bit of fun with them and get creative with them. But I'm also a big fan of Ross MacDonald, who is a very excellent author of noir fiction. And I wrote a handful of short stories that are a kind of tribute to him. With elements of more hard-boiled people like Walter Mosley and um, uh, uh, James Elroy, that kind of thing. So yeah, so I tried to read pretty widely, but inevitably I end up coming back to the genre that appeals to me the most. So I always end up back at the Golden Age.
Were you a fan of Graham Greene's crime stories?
Yes, and that's another movie, of course, The Third Man. That's another classic which had a great impact. The image of Orson Welles as Harry Lime silhouetted in that in the mouth of the sewer is another great and indelible image for me.
Yeah. So in the introduction, I mentioned your character of Joseph Spencer. Um,
Spectre.
Spectre, sorry. Yeah, I got it right before. Aaron, I got it right before, didn't I? Yes, I did. Okay. Thank God
I'll continue
we're
to.
not live. Okay, I'm going to take that question again, Aaron. Okay. Um, three, two, one. I mentioned earlier your character of Joseph Spectre. Um, what traits does he have to have to differentiate him from other investigators that are keys to these kind of great locked room mysteries?
Well, he's a stage magician, so I often it often strikes me that there's a significant overlap between stage magic conjuring and the world of mystery fiction. I mean, I often talk about how in both magicians and mystery writers are effectively controlling and guiding the perceptions of an audience. They control how much information an audience has, what they see and what they don't see, and they sort of massage the interpretation of events by guiding your expectations a particular way. So it made sense to me to have a detective character who is a magician. There's a tradition of this going back to the likes of Clayton Rawson, who's another favorite of mine, who was himself a magician, who also wrote a great series about a magician detective called The Great Merlini. So I think it was always in my mind to write about an amateur sleuth in the Golden Age tradition. So not a kind of naturalistic character study, but somebody who is eccentric, who is larger than life, so to speak. Someone that you can write about with a kind of playfulness. But also a character who would have fitted into those black and white movies that I've talked about. I often view him when I'm trying to picture him in my mind as a physical presence. I often find myself picturing the likes of Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, the two great Hammer horror stars. I usually think of him having the kind of stature and physical presence of Christopher Lee, but with that kind of soft spokenness of Peter Cushing. So that's the kind of image that I have in my mind. But then an element of Vincent Price-ish, Grand Guignol theatricality as well, with and flamboyance into the bargain.
Yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but in the house at Devil's Neck, he's introduced very subtly.
Ah, yeah, I like that. Thank you for picking up on that, because that's the kind of thing when by the time I reach book 4, I think I want to, if anything, make him even more kind of mysterious and a sort of oblique presence who kind of haunts the book.
Yeah, because I had just seen it. I was thinking of the way the shark hunter is introduced in Jaws. You know,
Yes.
he's sort of sitting in the back of the room and no one's paying attention to him, and yet he's the man who knows how to care for this situation. That's the impression I had of your character.
That's a really great analogy. I like that very much, because I think with somebody like Agatha Christie writing about Hercule Poirot, he as a character, he's this kind of collection of eccentric behaviors and caricature. Um, and that suits the plots perfectly, because he's always the outsider. And this is very much a Golden Age trope, this idea of the detective as the outsider in any given situation, looking in. So this is my way of tackling that with Joseph Spector, having him kind of lingering on the periphery for a little while before he makes himself known.
And then you have the journalist Emma Jean Drabble.
Mm-hmm.
And if one was unaware of the 3 previous books, we would have the impression that she was going to be our guide through this story.
Yeah.
She's
And another trope that I like, the kind of false protagonist almost, having a viewpoint character who then becomes a suspect in the puzzle plot. That's something that I really enjoy, and I did something similar in The Murder Wheel, the second book, as well.
Yeah, but she's not a throwaway character. She's 3-dimensional, and I really appreciated her.
Good. I'm glad. I appreciate that. I had fun writing her, and this is the good thing about doing a series like this, where your protagonist is by his nature somebody who is self-consciously mysterious and who deliberately obscures information about himself and his past, is that you can build up quite a robust cast of supporting characters, and you can bring them back. You can have little cameo appearances in other books and things like that. And that's something that I've been enjoying lately as well, bringing back some people that I particularly like from previous books.
Tell us about Inspector Flint of Scotland Yard.
Yeah, with pleasure. He's the counterpoint to Spectre, if you like. This is again, a partnership that really is really born out of the Golden Age puzzle plots. That idea of the amateur sleuth who knows it all, and the kind of plodding working police officer who is always a couple of steps behind. So that's the kind of basic dynamic that I established between the two characters from the beginning. But I've really liked building up Flint in terms of his kind of inner workings and thoughts and memories and things like that, which I think kind of complements Spectre as the quite literally the kind of spectral presence in the book. I think it's nice to give Flint a bit more of a well-rounded characterization, and I hopefully I think it lets me get away with making Spectre so obscure and hard to pin down, with just occasional flashes of the real man underneath.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that Flint is not inept or a comic foil.
Yeah, that's something that I wanted to try and subvert, if you like, because it is a very common trope. This idea, the Inspector Lestrade, who's always falling behind or not quite getting the gist of what's going on. And there are elements of that because, of course, I want Flint to be more of a grounded character, if you like, somebody who is, I suppose, a lens for the reader to see into the plot, somebody who tries to kind of unravel what's going on as the plot progresses, whereas Spectre is there as this kind of all-knowing figure. So that's the kind of dynamic that I had in mind for the two.
And also, both of your protagonists feed us backstory. And
Yeah.
they do it in a very naturalistic way. I want to compliment you on the early on in the book. I don't have my notes at hand, but there's a long stretch of dialogue in which backstory is conveyed. And I remember it wasn't until I had read that section that I realized that that's what you had done.
That's a real compliment, because that is something that I'm conscious of when writing, because in any book like this, because it's not a thick book, it's not a chunky tome, it's quite a lean book, as they all are really, but it's kind of densely packed with incident and information, but I don't want it to feel like it's kind of a load-bearing book,
Right. And for most of the book, your two protagonists aren't in close proximity. We have the sense, but we're not 100% certain that they're going to collide at some point. And what you've done is you use alternate chapters, to achieve that effect. Was that did you have that thought all along, that Flint would have his chapter?
I did.
You did, okay.
Yeah, I did. That was very much a conscious idea of mine, to have two parallel mystery plots, if you like, and in one plot a certain clue would be revealed about the nature of the other plot, and vice versa. To me, I like these kind of structural games that you can play with the whodunits. That's something that I've enjoyed learning about from the the recent influx of Japanese translations of whodunits, both classic and contemporary. For instance, Keigo Higashino is somebody that is very good at that, and also Yukito Ayatsuji. They write brilliant books which are locked room mysteries in some instances and very cleverly plotted, but they will frequently use these kind of stylistic tricks to kind of get under the reader's skin, and I love that kind of thing. So that was what I was trying to do here.
Yeah, you have, and I think I kind of lost count, but you have at least 3 locked room mysteries within this locked room mystery. Or is it more than that? But
yeah, well, it depends how you classify them. I would probably say 3. I think you're on the money. But I always like to pack in as much as I can into these books for various reasons, but mainly because the ones that I read tend to be the most flamboyant and out there in their plotting. I mean, John Dickson Carr's The Hollow Man, aka The Three Coffins, is to my mind still a masterpiece of the genre, and that's such an exercise in showboating. You know, Carr is really pulling out all the stops with that and piling on the impossibilities, and so I'm always kind of chasing that same buzz, if you like. I want to give readers the same feel that I got when I first read The Hollow Man, for instance, but also that it also has another purpose, which is that I want readers to try and play along and to suss out who done it and to piece together the clues and things, but I don't want them to guess every element of the plot, and I feel like the odds of that are decreased if I pile in more and more mysteries. Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of times having fun with the reader and having fun with the story. And I found that sense of fun to be delightful. If you wouldn't mind, could I ask you to just read something from the book? I'm thinking of page 96. If you've got it there, it's about 2/3 of the way down.
Yes.
It begins with Madame Lamotte speaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let it rip, please.
Fabulous. Here goes. You are right, interrupted Madame Lamotte. This place is effervescing with psychic energy. In fact, I would suggest we begin our communion as soon as possible. A séance before dinner? Clive Lennox was hesitant. There is not a moment to waste, said Madame Lamotte, sounding like a Saturday morning serial. She would truck no argument. Well, for goodness sake, what on earth are we waiting for? She declared. Our great work is just beginning. Mrs. Lennox, Mr. Lennox, no doubt you are aware of the reason for my visit here. It was not merely to sample your hospitality. I am here to make contact.
Thank you so much. There are like 5 or 6 winks to the reader right in that little section there.
Yes, you've got it. Yeah, thank you for picking that section. I mean, I love writing about. I've talked about the Gothic elements in murder mysteries, and that is particularly prevalent in books that feature seances and psychic mediums and all that kind of stuff. So this is very much me tackling that sub-genre, if you like.
No, it's really wonderful. I think every sentence is carefully chosen, and I actually have read this aloud to my wife. It's one of those. Listen to this.
That's very flattering. I appreciate that.
And she's actually wrestled the book from me. She has it now.
Wonderful.
But what I like about that, if you have the capacity to write funny, it's not hard to write funny. People who can't write funny find it impossible to write funny. Mm-hmm. But if you can write funny, then you write funny. But what I love about that section is it actually advances the plot. You're spoofing the form. That we get. We understand that you're having fun. But we may not understand you've just advanced the plot.
That's very it's very flattering to have that kind of critique applied to it, because obviously the goal is always to entertain, but that entertainment that takes different forms, whether it's in the prose or in, kind of aping the style of the Golden Age, but also in constructing a plot that feels like it could be a product of that era. So those are my kind of twin concerns, my twin approaches to writing, I suppose.
You've used cliffhangers very effectively. My favorite is, you see, I'm his mother. Fade to black.
Yeah, well, this is it. You want to keep the reader turning the pages, and this is another nice element about having the alternating chapters, is that a cliffhanger feels more like a cliffhanger because you know that the next chapter you're going to be back with Flint or whatever.
Right.
So you know that you've got to kind of chew over what you've just learned throughout the following chapter before you can get back to it.
So early on, you mentioned that you have core characters. You have a cast of characters. Setting. Tell me, how do you approach setting? How important is setting to you?
Setting, yeah, it's very important. I think, if anything, it's got more important the more I've written. The first two books, Death and the Conjurer and The Murder Wheel, are both set in London, in theatre land. Now, I'm a theatre geek. I love the world of theatre and all the ghost stories, the superstitions surrounding it, and the traditions going back hundreds of years in the London theatre and all that kind of thing. So the first book, it had a few different settings, but really I was conscious of London as a kind of entity. In The Murder Wheel, I concentrated more on a single specific location, which was a fictional West End theatre. So that was great because I got to indulge all of my interests, my kind of theatre geekiness by creating this fictional theatre and trying to give it that sense of authenticity and inventing a whole history of this place, and all the kind of shenanigans going on in the backstage corridors and dressing rooms and all that kind of thing. But for the third book, which was Cabaret Macabre, that was when I decided to try and use the setting to create more of a kind of a Gothic feel. Now, that book is a retelling of the Revenger's tragedy, the Jacobean drama. So I thought that was kind of an experiment for me to take that very wacky, bloodthirsty plot and try to turn it inside out and turn it into a whodunit. So I thought a setting needs to reflect that. It needs to be kind of a self-contained, more isolated setting. So we're out of London in that one, and we're at a fictional country house, Marchbanks, where the various impossible murders take place at a snowbound country house party. So again, a classic Golden Age setup. But this time, I thought, well, how do I kind of top that in terms of Golden Age tropes? So this time we're at what was a hospital during the First World War, but which is in fact an old manor house with a very storied past on an island, which is loosely based on the real life OC Island here in England, which I think also inspired Susan Hill's The Woman in Black, her Eelmarsh house. So it has a real life precedent. This house at the end of a very narrow causeway, which is lashed by the elements and frequently cut off from the rest of the world. But it's also a very Golden Age thing to have this group of people trapped during a storm on this little island. It feels very much like And Then There Were None and all that kind of thing. So I think that the setting, well, hence the title, really. That's why I decided to call this one The House at Devil's Neck, because the house is it's not just the setting. It informs and progresses the story as well. So in many ways it is an entity within the plot as well as a backdrop.
Yeah, I would say that the house itself is a character in your
Yes, I
story.
agree. I agree.
Yeah. All right, so now you've got your core characters, you've got your setting. Um, when do you start thinking of what the crime will be?
Well, now this varies from book to book. Sometimes I'll come up with I'll have a fun effect that I think it would make sense within a plot, and I'll think, how do I go about contriving circumstances that lead us to that effect? But other times I will have the ingredients, and I will and I will think, how can I combine all of these to create a sense of something impossible or seemingly supernatural? With Devil's Neck, it's kind of both, because I knew that I wanted to write about a seance. So, of course, I was going to do a lot of research into the phony spiritualists and psychic mediums of the early 20th century and all the kind of tricks and gimmicks they used. So that I thought that there's a lot of material there. But this led me into reading about ghost hunting and the boom in the ghost hunting business, if you like, with various traps and ghost hunting kits that they would use in real life so-called haunted houses, like the famous Borley Rectory, which was often called the most haunted house in England. And that is another influence on the house at Devil's Neck as well, that real life setting, though it had burned down by this point in 1939 where the book is set. But I do make a reference to it in the book. But a lot of the ghost hunting kits and things like that suggested how some of the impossibilities could be contrived. Like, for instance, the business in the second half of the book, where the characters they retire to their separate bedrooms, and a kind of contraption of strings and bells is hung up in the corridor so that they'll know if anybody sneaks out during the night. But of course, when they wake, they find that somebody has been murdered without disturbing the bells and strings.
Right.
And so that was very much suggested by a real life device that was used by the likes of Harry Price, the famous ghost hunter, and that sort of thing. So it was kind of twofold, really, in that I had a lot of the ingredients, but the effects came together quite, I suppose, organically, as in they kind of sprang directly from all the bits and pieces that I was compiling as I was working out the plot. So it all came together very satisfyingly for me.
Yeah, and for the reader as well. I want to mention that you have a Freudian psychiatrist who references Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yes.
And-
Yes, Lydia Reese. She makes a return appearance because she is in Death and the Conjurer, and I enjoyed writing about her. And so I thought I'll bring her back because, again, we have an issue in the plot which is related to interpreting dreams and interpreting the dream diary of a deceased character to try and work out what was going on. And that kind of thing. I mean, another movie that I love is the Hitchcock movie, is it Spellbound, the one with the Salvador Dali designed dream sequences. That was another movie that I saw at a young age and that I thought was absolutely mind-blowing. And so I am fascinated by psychoanalysis and Freudian psychology and all that kind of thing, mainly as a narrative device, just because it enables you to explore that kind of strange liminal space of the unconscious, and to tap into readers, I suppose to explore the kind of uncanny, the sort of in-betweenness, which I find really helps to build up atmosphere and create a sense of something eerie and uneasy going on,
Yeah. So You worked as a translator, is that correct?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm in the process of translating a number of locked room mystery novels from French to English. They're really fantastic books. At the moment, I'm translating Paul Alter, who you may know. Some of his books were previously issued under the Locked Room International independent publishing banner, but now, sadly, with the passing of John Pugmire, Locked Room International has ceased to be, and so a UK publisher has commissioned me to produce some new translations.
Yeah, the reason I raised this is there is a particular language in your book, in which you use language that is not typical of the time. It's language from a prior period. Certain words, certain phrases, certain construction. That helps have that effect of tying us to the golden age without any direct reference.
That's very much a conscious thing, because the books of the golden age were themselves products of the Victorian era, and there are echoes of that, and further back all the way to Edgar Allan Poe, I suppose, who was famous for his his very kind of colorful and florid description, his very lush prose, and also a great innovator of detective fiction. So I think you can kind of trace that lineage all the way back, and I like to well, like you say, I don't want it to feel too overt, but I want it to feel as though this is a book from another time, if you like.
Right. But there's also the precision of language that so much can be achieved with it if it's used sparingly.
Yes.
And we had mentioned Graham Greene earlier. His crime stories never fail, at least when I read them, to show that at a certain point he is relying on his facility with prose to get him through a sequence.
Absolutely, yes. Graham Greene, he was a great towering figure of 20th century literature, but really a great figure in the world of genre fiction, because he was somebody who transcended genre, not to disparage genre fiction, but he was somebody who showed that genre fiction was not unliterary.
Yes, exactly. So, Tom, what's next for you?
Well, I actually have various bits and pieces on the go at the moment. I'm still in the process of translating. So I've translated 2 of the Paul Alter novels, and I am getting underway with a third, which will be called The Crimson Fog. And it's a great locked room mystery which also features a guest appearance by Jack the Ripper. So it's a real fun one. And then I will be getting to grips with Spectre 5, which I can't say too much about at the moment, but let's just say it'll. I'm with all of the books. I want each one to feel like a progression from the last one. I want it to feel like you've kind of gone up a gear. So I'm really pulling out all the stops with this next one.
I can't wait. Our guest on this episode of Writers at Work is Tom Mead. His latest novel is The House at Devil's Neck. And to my mind, he is a new master of the locked room mystery. Tom, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Jim.
Writers at Work is a production of Bliss Publications. Erin Mitchell is our producer. Music is by Joni Mitchell, performed by Keith Jarrett. For more, see writersatworkpodcast.com. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Until next time, happy reading.